So I have realized recently that there are a surprising number of really basic foods that I've never actually made myself. And lately I've been on a bit of a kick trying to change that. Some of these things have been out of necessity because there are quite a few things that we just don't have here in Vienna, like coffee creamer or what I personally consider decent bagels. I'm still working on that one though. But some of it has been out of pure curiosity. I've been making baguettes, I have been perfecting my sandwich loaf and making things like hummus and other spreads. And realizing that there are all these everyday foods I buy without ever really thinking about how they're actually made. So, part of my goal to try 50 new things in my 50s, I have decided to try making a few of these everyday staples completely from scratch to see what happens. Not complicated things. I mean things like butter, bread, cheese, which is funny because for most of history, these weren't specialty skills. They were just normal household knowledge. Now, I want to say this that I'm not a cooking channel, so I don't have all the fancy gadgets. So please bear with me as I muddle through this. I'm mostly curious about how these foods were actually made, why we stopped making many of them at home, and whether learning even a few of these skills changes the way that I can think about things that I buy regularly. So, I wanted to start with butter because to me it feels like the perfect example of this whole idea. It's something that I buy regularly and never really think about it. And yet, for most of history, people knew exactly how it got from cream to table. Butter kind of feels like one of those foods that should be complicated. I mean, it's going from a liquid to a solid. And I think I had this image in my head of, the giant wood butter churns and people spending hours making a tiny amount of butter. So I don't know, somewhere along the way, I convinced myself that it must require a lot of strength and patience and I don't know, maybe a slightly miserable afternoon. That it's basically just cream, agitated long enough to separate. And for centuries, this would have been an ordinary household task in many homes. So I've decided to make cultured butter, which is just basically adding a bit of active cultures to the cream to give it a little bit of a deeper flavor. So I mixed in a small amount of Greek yogurt to my heavy cream and set it out overnight. Now, I don't own a stand mixer, so I ended up buying this contraption on Amazon for about 30 euros, and it worked really well. It took less than 5 minutes of churning for the fat to separate and become butter. Commercial butter became much more common in the late 1800s and early 1900s as industrial dairies, refrigeration, and transportation improved. Before that, many households, especially rural ones, made butter regularly because fresh dairy just simply didn't last very long. Now, I don't don't think we need to make butter at home just to live like the past, but it was really interesting getting to see all of the stages in between. We usually only see the finished product, but watching the cream become whipped cream and then separate into butter and buttermilk made the whole process feel just much more tangible. There's something really grounding about understanding where a basic food actually comes from, instead of it just appearing wrapped in paper at your grocery store. So queso fresco is one of the items that I wanted to learn how to make out of necessity. I'm from San Diego, and one of the things that I miss most living here in Vienna is good Mexican food. Now, I will say there are a few Mexican restaurants here that are pretty good, but over the years, I've just learned how to make a lot of dishes that I grew up eating. But I've never tried making my own fresh cheese before. So this felt like a good excuse to finally learn. Cheese is the one that I genuinely thought might fail. It turns out fresh cheeses are actually much simpler than I imagined. A lot of early cheese making wasn't about luxury. It was practical. People needed ways to preserve milk before refrigeration existed, and fresh cheeses like this could be made with surprisingly few ingredients. And there is actually a strange connection between Mexico and the city I now call home. In the 1860s, Austrian Archduke Maximilian of Habsburg became Emperor of Mexico. It's one of those historical stories that sounds completely made up when you first hear it. But unfortunately for Maximilian, it did not end particularly well. He was captured and executed after a short 3-year reign. But one of the things that I've always loved about history is how often seemingly unrelated things turn out to be connected. It feels fitting that a food I associate so strongly with home ended up having a strange historical connection to the city where I live now. And I think that's part of what I've enjoyed most about this whole experience. Learning how to make foods isn't just about the food itself. It's about understanding the stories behind them, where they come from, and how they became part of our everyday lives. Bread is incredibly fascinating to me because it starts with such a short list of ingredients: flour, water, salt, yeast. That's it. And somehow those four simple ingredients come together to create one of the most important staple foods in human history. Even after making different kinds of bread several times now, I still find the yeast fascinating. I know what's happening, I understand the science behind it, and yet watching it come to life in warm water still feels a bit magical. It's one of those things that reminds me how disconnected many of us have become from the process of making food. For most of human history, people didn't just eat bread. They understood how it worked. They watched the dough rise. They knew what ingredients did and how they behaved. Bread feels almost universal. Nearly every culture has some version of it, and for most of human history, people made it constantly because they had to. It's interesting how many foods shifted from household staples to commercial products over the 20th century, especially after World War II. Convenience foods became heavily marketed as symbols of modernity, efficiency, and freedom from labor. And honestly, I understand why. Most people today are busy, overworked, exhausted, and just trying to survive. Store-bought bread is not some moral failure. I just think there's a value in knowing how these things are made. Now, I don't think making everything from scratch is realistic for most people. Honestly, I don't even think it was realistic for a lot of people historically. Convenience foods became popular for a reason. But I do think that there's something empowering about learning basic skills like this. Not because you have to use them every day, but because knowledge itself has value. And I think understanding how everyday things are made connects us to history, to other people, and maybe even a little more to our own lives. And homemade butter on warm focaccia is dangerously good. Well, I have finished making my butter and queso fresco and focaccia bread, and I'm really pleased with myself. I think they all turned out relatively good for a first run. The butter tastes fantastic. I do need to wash it a little bit better. I did end up going through a few more washes with it. We don't have ice makers here in our freezer, so I have a tabletop ice maker, and I didn't make enough ice cubes at the time, so I went through and made a few more so I could have more of that ice cold water to wash it. So I learned my lesson on that. The queso fresco turned out really good. It is slightly too vinegary, I think. I'm not sure if the ratio on that recipe is just off, but I've also heard that you can use lime juice or lemon juice. I think lime juice would be really good with that. So I'd like to try that again with lime juice or just a little bit less vinegar, but it tastes great. I'm really happy with it. And the focaccia is fantastic. I wanted to try the plain first with just a little bit of sea salt, and it turned out great. I'm really happy with it. I can't wait to try other flavors and toppings on that. So I'm really excited and I'm very proud of myself. Well, thank you so much for joining me on this culinary journey. If you would like to see more of this kind of content, let me know in the comments. I would like to make more grocery staples like mayonnaise or cream cheese, different kinds of breads. So if you would like to see me go through them and make them for the first time, let me know in the comments. If there's anything that you make regularly that is, fairly simple to make, let me know in the comments and I will put it on my list for things to try. Thank you so much for watching. I will see you next time.